Good evening. Let's get going. We've got a relatively short agenda, but no reason to tarry. Welcome new members and old to our committee tonight. I'd like to thank those who we haven't put off from last year, who have returned to serve again, and to new members of the committee. I just want to repeat what I said this time last year at the first meeting that I chaired, and that's that I think as far as is possible, we should try and remember that in this room, at least, we're a team. That our role is to scrutinise the delivery of services on behalf of residents, to hold portfolio holders to account. I think that's something that we have done very well over the last year, and that is something that happens with questions from all sides, people of all political stripes. We don't stop being politically minded, but I think that we can do our best to leave those differences behind and try and work together in that collegiate fashion. Nonetheless, I would also point out that we are perhaps not the most exciting political event happening in Medway tonight. I understand there is a hustings taking place elsewhere. Let's leave the election outside this room as far as possible as well, because whether people are in attendance at that hustings or not, they don't need any proxies here to argue their case for them. They're perfectly capable of doing that outside this room. So let's give ourselves a couple of hours break and make this room an election-free zone, if you would all oblige me on that. Kicking off with item 1, apologies for absence. Apologies have been received from Councillor Doe, and we have Councillor Galvin substituting. We also have apologies from Councillor Filmer. Moving on, are there any other apologies? I don't think I've missed. There's no gaps in the meeting. Can I move on to item 2, which is record of the meeting on pages 5 to 12 of your report pack? Can I sign the record of the meeting held on 26th of March 2024 as correct? Agreed? Thank you. There being no urgent matters, we move on to item 4, declarations of disclosable pecuniary interests and other significant interests. Are there any declarations? Excellent. In which case, we can get started on item 5, which is the Council Plan Performance Monitoring and Strategic Risk Register Summary for Quarter 4, 2023-24. That's on pages 15 to 88 of your report pack. Ruth is going to introduce this item. When we move to members' questions, comments, can I ask that if you are referring to a specific passage in the report pack that you give the page number, and then we can all literally be on the same page and looking at the same item. Ruth.
Thank you, Chair. Members, this report summarises the performance of the Council Plan measures that fall under the remit of this committee for Quarter 4, 2023 to 2024, January to March 2024. There are 15 Council Plan measures of success which fall under the remit of this committee. These are presented in Appendices 1 and 2. 3 measures fall under the place priority and 12 measures fall under the growth priority. We are reporting on 14 measures this quarter as 1 measure is data only. That's the growth value added per job Medway. Of the Council Plan measures we are reporting on, 71.4%, that is 10 out of 14, met or exceeded their target. 14.3%, that's 2 out of 14, were slightly below target, that's less than 5%. And 21.4%, that's 3 out of 14, were significantly below target, that's 5% or more. This report also presents the Quarter 4 2023 to 2024 review of strategic risks in Appendix 3. There are no changes to the strategic risk scores for this quarter. Just to note that Cabinet received this report on the 11th of June 2024. Members, I will hand it over to you if there are any questions, please.
Any member? Councillor Etheridge.
Thank you, and thank you, Ruth, for your report. I've got a number of questions, so we'll start off on page 21, please. and the third line down regarding comments about improved street and environmental cleanliness and litter. And it's mentioned there that rural roads are inspected for ensuring that they're clean and tidy. Is it possible to tell me which rural wards and which rural part of the community you're viewing, please?
Thanks, Councillor Etheridge. Yeah, I can certainly find that data and you can have that as a small briefing note of a list of the roads. Yeah.
Can we now move on to page 22 of where we're looking at the Innovation Hub and Medway, and we're now talking specifically about Debenhams. I would just like to know where we are in terms of the progress on that and when it's likely to be open. Thank you.
So in terms of Debenhams, at the moment we're in discussion, in confidential discussions, waiting for confirmation of the potential letting of the ground and first floor. Because of commercial sensitivity, we're not allowed to say who that is at the moment. That could be a few months away in terms of confirmation. In the meantime, upstairs there was always the intention of converting it to residential, so having some kind of use that opened out onto the high street, active frontage on the ground floor. In terms of the upstairs, again, sensible thing to do, which is what we're doing at the moment, is to wait to see what happens with the ground floor. We have some OPE funding, which we're spending to do some generic works upstairs that we need to commission by March 2025. So we're working on that at the moment, whilst also pushing as hard as we can to get the ground floor and the first floor let. That's where we are at the moment. So it's a bit of a holding position on everywhere else. Did you mention the Innovation Hub as well?
I did.
Yeah, so in terms of the Innovation Hub, we're nearly there with the works. They're moving along very swiftly. We expect to be open in September, so we've been working with the agent who's going to be basically letting out space. And again, it's around innovation, sort of innovative startups, and again around bringing additional footfall to the shopping centre and using the first floor, which before was not particularly well used. So that's on track for September.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Still on page 22, where it says deliver several 106 improvements. I noticed the list there is quite comprehensive, with the exception of what's taking place both on the peninsula and in Strood Rural. I'm fully aware that 106 payments have been paid by the developers, but there doesn't seem to be any work taking place and there's nothing been scheduled. I'm just wondering what's happening to those, please.
Yeah, thank you for your question, Councillor Etheridge. So there is some activity taking place in respect of softer work, so in terms of the community infrastructure framework that's being looked at for the peninsula and with the community there. That work is ongoing, but I'm more than happy to speak with our planning team and get you a list of any Section 106 contributions that are due for the peninsula and Strood Rural and provide any progress against those.
Thank you. Moving on to page 24, Medway Task Force. Very pleased to see that the new neighbourhood policing model has come into being and basically who's got the responsibilities for what. I think it would have been helpful, which obviously you're not going to give me today, but a briefing note would suffice, of exactly what has been achieved from that new model. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Etheridge. I can certainly provide you with a briefing note from the perspective of the Community Safety Partnership, and I'll engage with Kent Police colleagues to deliver that. And we'll provide a paragraph that how the task force has morphed into the new policing model. Does that cover what you need?
Thank you. I'm most grateful for that. If we move on to page 25, air quality monitoring. Now, we're looking at the Radon idling project. Now, this has been discussed within this committee numerous times over the last 2 years, and it has been stated very clearly by the providers of the information for the stop-start card process that it's for a single or double stop-start, not multiple, and therefore it damages the engine. Therefore, manufacturers are now recommending that the drivers turn that process off, and that's supported by the RAC and AA. And I find it rather difficult to understand why it's still here to put signage up reminding them to do this when they've been told by the manufacturer and the relevant agencies for motoring not to do it because of the amount of damage it's doing to their vehicles. So I'd like an explanation on that, please.
Thanks, Councillor Etheridge. I'll speak to Stuart and we'll get you a briefing note. It'll explain the input of that, the opinions of the university, and a considered response.
Okay, you may get a response from the university, but I think you should also expect a response from the appropriate manufacturers and people like the RAC and the AA, who are certainly more qualified to give a response, and they have already done so numerous times. So if you include those in with your response, I'd be so happy with that. Thank you.
Councillor Galvin.
Sorry,
you, Chair.
I've not finished. I'm just moving down the page. But I'm more than happy to give way to Councillor Galvin whilst I'm finding myself.
Can I ask how many more questions?
Always loads. You should know me by now.
While my colleague gets his breath back, I've got just 2 or 3 things to comment on. Page 21, when it refers to the future High Street funding and the projects in Chatham Town Centre, whilst it's good news to see that the contractors have been appointed for the Healthy Living Centre and the Innovation Hub, I think it has to be noted that the Gantt chart that I've got at home shows that project to be virtually completed by now. And the reason for this delay is, unfortunately, the NHS property services seem to be totally incapable of getting their act together. It's not a criticism of the NHS in general, because I've had very good treatment from the NHS in the last few weeks. But the property side is so incompetent, it just beggars belief. And I think also we did miss a trick. It's good to see that the area at the top now has been hoarded off. But all the time that was not hoarded off, we as the owners of the property had to pay the council tax on that. And unfortunately, we only get 49% of the council tax. The other 50% goes to the government and 1% goes to Kent Fire and Rescue. So that first floor of the Pentagon has been a drain on the council's resources now for a long, long time. And, you know, we should have really moved a bit faster than that, but at least it is moving. And, it's a really good, the Healthy Living Centre in particular is a really good project, because that's the centre of Chatham is one of the worst performing lower super output areas in the whole of Medway. It's got all the socio-economic problems that, that heaped upon it, and having a good modern health facility in that area can only be a very, very good thing. And also, as far as the Pentagon is concerned, the Landay, who are managing agents for the Pentagon, they manage and own a lot of shopping centres up and down the length and breadth of the country. And they estimate having a facility such as the HLT on the premises, it will increase the footfall well over 1 million visitors a year. And that's got to be for the benefit of the Pentagon and indeed the centre of Chatham. The other thing I want to comment on is the Medway Task Force on page 24. I think it's a great shame that this has been disbanded. Whilst they say in the report that we'll be having regular partnership meetings, I don't think that compensates for the benefits of having teams of people from various disciplines in the same room working together. We will never have that holistic response. Again, when you're dealing with areas of high social deprivation and crime, all these factors merge together. It's not just a policing matter, it's housing, it's dealing with benefits for the DWP, it's dealing with home safety through Kent Fire and Rescue. And I think it's really a shame that we haven't kept that concept going, because it It worked brilliantly in Margate many years ago, and I think it's worked very, very well for the last few years here in Medway. And I'm deeply disappointed that we won't have that facility now in Medway. Whilst the new neighbourhood policing scheme sounds good on paper, the reality is that you really have to target your resources into the area of the most need, and that's what the task force did. It concentrated on those areas with high levels of social deprivation, and I really like to hold the police in particular to account. If we get a fall off in the quality of deep dives that the task force did, I think they need to be held to account for that. The only other thing is to talk about LR CCD 4A on page 51, which it's good to see that we're taking an active role in preventing job losses here in Medway and doing everything we can to help those who lose their jobs. I just hope we've got enough resources to cover all the job losses that will be happening with the closure of Chatham docks. Thank you.
Sonny, do you want to be able to give us any sort of update on the Healthy Living Centre?
Yeah, I felt that was more for noting, if you like. So there isn't much to update other than, yes, we're absolutely desperate to get in there. I think you rightly note, to be fair, the council has always responded, as you know, in your time, and obviously with the new portfolio holder in the last year, we have always responded within time in terms of what was needed. It is very much around the processes, unfortunately, at the ICB end, but we are nearly there. And again, obviously, yes, we've pushed the programme accordingly. And again, the programme is all from the ICB in terms of their funding, when it needs to be spent by, and when they can actually approve to get on site. So we're obviously tracking that with the ICB at the moment, but there's no further update on that was noted.
Thank you. Councillor Etheridge, if you don't mind, I'm going to take a few more questions and come back to you, and you'll be fully on your... Exactly, on your marks, absolutely. Councillor Campbell.
Hello. Thank you for this report. My first question is on page 21, where it says the improved street and environmental cleanliness litter, that upon inspection you found 97.33% of streets in good condition. Now my ward is Fort Pitt, and I get so many complaints from residents in certain areas about continued issues with litter. So I really want to know what the baseline for that data is. How do you select what streets and when to inspect? Because unfortunately, this isn't borne out by my experience, because I take my dog out walking in my ward regularly, and it's really bad. And the residents email me as well. So, and they are hotspots, so they are always the same areas. We know what those streets are like. So I just want to understand how you chose those streets to be inspected. What's the kind of background to that? Thank you.
So I know this is, and you're absolutely right to bring it up, Councillor Campbell. And I think it's a perennial question, certainly in my time on this committee. And I think it's useful because we have quite a few new members of the committee that we just go through this one more time about the process for the selection and how those inspections take place, because I just want to be really clear. There are no stupid questions. While some of us have the benefit of having been on this committee over a period of time, I think sometimes these things that come up is certainly really useful with new members, because we're going to do this for at least another 3 times in this year. So let's make sure that we're all aware of the process, if you don't mind, Ian. Thank you.
Okay. So the way we monitor our streets are in compliance with a national indicator. So it provides us with a benchmarking tool to compare ourselves to other neighbourhoods. It's not to say there's not problems. It's not to say that you're not legitimate in raising them. In terms of the selection of the street, that's done at the start of the year. We keep that over multiple years. There's a frequency of inspections. We try to do those at the appropriate time of the week in a monthly cycle. I have contract monitoring officers who go out and inspect those. I can provide a prepared briefing note that will explain the process to you. and maybe after you've considered that, happily come back to the next meeting and we can hack our way through that. But it's one of those things, if there are issues, raise them with FLS, we'll get it addressed. It's one of those things, if there's one complaint, that's acceptable. If we've got these multiple hotspots, then it's not just a cleaning issue, it's potentially an enforcement issue.
Thanks, Ian. And I think if that briefing note is available to send to all members, I think that would be appreciated. Councillor Maritime.
Thank you. Further, actually, to Councillor Etheridge's first question and my colleague, Councillor Campbell, could you do a briefing note, actually, with a breakdown of all residential streets per ward, the main roads, the alleyways, and the footbridges and subways for each ward? And on a related matter as well is, have you got details of the number of bins per ward as well?
Certainly have the information on the number of bins per ward, as was a topic last year, and I can supply you that. I'll speak to officers and I'll try and come up with a tangible format that delivers on everything you've asked for.
I understand I cut Councillor Campbell short as well, so let's give her at least a couple more questions before we move on.
Thank you. Equality of opportunity and all that, you know. So page 23, where it's looking at Section 106 money being spent, Victoria Gardens is mentioned there. That's in my ward. And it says that the tender has been delayed to the next financial year. So obviously I'm disappointed. It's quite key green space in my ward, which a lot of residents use. So just so I understand correctly, so the money is there. It's just the process that you don't have the time or the resources for in this cycle. Is that what it is?
So I'm sure as you'll appreciate, we receive a lot of Section 106 contributions, and sometimes they relate to very big schemes, sometimes they're very small, sometimes they're multiple thousands of pounds, sometimes they're, a few £100s. I don't know the answer to this question specifically off the top of my head, so I have a Section 106 responsibility for collecting the money through the planning process. Sonny's team deliver the improvements to green spaces. We don't know the answer to this one between us, so we'll have to find out that specific question and come back to you if that's okay.
So page 42, where it's a list of prosecutions and sanctions. So it's looking at fly tipping and litter. Again, particular interest to me from what I've picked up in terms of issues in my ward. I'm just curious as to why in 2023-24, the rate for prosecutions and sanctions for these two things is significantly lower than previous years.
On fly tipping, your question wasn't it, around, and litter? Thank you.
Okay. There's a variety of reasons. Again, I'll get you a briefing note that'll fully explain it. Things like prosecutions are a reaction to situations that the officers have found. In terms of littering, we emerged from COVID. It was a strange environment for lots of statistics. However, in terms of prosecutions, officers prosecute the issues that are reported to them, and it's based on the available evidence. We've reflected on that, and we're seeing a different approach. This first quarter, we've seen an increase in it. It's very hard for me to pinpoint like a catalyst that causes it. Sometimes it's just a reporting issue. Sometimes it's an evidential issue. But I'll reflect on that with officers, and we'll try and get you, if there is any metric that can indicate that. There's not been a great deal of change in staffing and resources, so it's not overly linked to that, but there are inevitable ebbs and flows in prosecutions, and some of the prosecutions take place over potentially a year, 18 months, so you can have complex prosecutions that take a lot of time that manifest themselves the following year.
Thank you. I would appreciate a little bit of reflection and feedback because it's kind of significantly lower, And with all these briefing papers, I feel like I'm going away with homework now, but thank you.
Councillor Peake.
Thank you, Chair. I need to go back to now on page 22. Just have a very quick question. So I'm particularly curious about when I can find it. There's a one-sentence reference. I apologise if it's elsewhere in the report. Under innovation, it says Brook Theatre, technology accessible improvements, blah, blah, blah. It says, actually, two questions. It says that the £300,000 has been fully spent. So the first question, is there an issue of funding regarding the theatre to get to the point when it reopens to the public? And the second question is, what is the ETA on it opening back to the public, please?
Thank you, I can answer that. So Mark is client, if you like, and it's my team that are physically delivering it. So there's multiple funding streams for the Brook Theatre, so that's the good news. There isn't a shortage currently, so we've got a combination of capital funding from the council. We also have Future High Street Fund, which is fully spent, and then we also have the Levelling Up Fund in terms of the Chatham package of projects. So the funding is there, so the building isn't closed because there's a lack of funding, it's just in process in regard to designing up, and we've just gone out to procurement in terms of getting the final design together, and we're hoping to go out to get the contractors on board this side of Christmas, roughly, is when we're hoping to get on site. We're then looking at broadly, from memory actually, I think from a client side, is it near the end of 25 that we're looking for an opening. So at the moment, there's not a problem, if you like, because we've got the funding and we're going through the process of procuring the contractor and getting them on site. So there are no issues in terms of your initial concern around funding at this stage.
2025 is the year that I had in my head, so I just wanted confirmation. Thank you.
Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Chair. Just going back to the Healthy Living Centre, given how long the ICB and the NHS are taking to come up with the plan at their end, what discussions are we having about the commissioning of services that are likely to go in the Healthy Living Centre? Because having a building is one thing, but actually providing services is another thing. And I know the ICB have made lots of people redundant recently. There's not a particularly good place to work. And I'm just wondering what discussions we're having through our officers and league members, because I know Councillor Murray is very interested in this. So
I'm guessing there's an element of overlap with other committees' work, so we could sort of have a brief overview if possible, and obviously leave. We don't want to encroach on other committees' roles.
Rest assured, it'll be very brief because this is something that I would have to get. So I'm happy to ask for a briefing note on those conversations. So obviously, we're aware that there will be a number of GP surgeries relocating to the site. There's also a pharmacy that we know that's going to be on there, and we're also looking at therapy rooms and various other elements. So we're trying to, if you like, add as much value to that space as possible, but I can ask colleagues in public health to provide a note to this ONS just to give you an idea of what's going in there in more detail.
The key point is the place doesn't attract footfall if there's no services being provided from it. That was the point of the question. On the inward investment, page 46, we're talking about the Innovation Park building. I was just wondering, as we're renewing contracts with tenants in there, are rents holding up? And are there any significant leases coming up for renewal that we might be worried about being renewed? I know there's a lot of public sector in there, so
So dare I say it, this will now be the kiss of death, but there are no concerns at the moment. People are still queuing up for them, and in fact, that's one of the things obviously we're looking at in terms of the Innovation Hub and other spaces. So at the moment, the market is quite buoyant, but this is obviously a snapshot and a point in time, but we've got nothing that we're aware of in terms of anyone leaving or any issues around trying to fill the space.
And just to pick up on Councillor Goldwyn's point about the docks and the loss of jobs there, if I remember rightly, I think the administration had a target of creating 1,000 jobs when it came into office. We haven't really created any jobs in the last year from the reports. It's red. I'm just wondering what officers' thoughts are on the current job market in Medway. And I suppose also just reflecting a little bit on the planning application in Basin 3, which is light industrial office space, if the number of jobs being created is so low at the moment, what chance of the property owner got filling those spaces? Sorry.
Hey, sorry, I'm just waiting for the lights to go before I keep pressing it on and off. So, you know, these are challenging times at the moment. So I think Mark will address the doc's question. But in regard to the jobs and the 1,000 jobs, yes, it's difficult at the moment. I think we're looking at a different approach to the IPM because, again, it was very difficult to go out there and build it ourselves, build it and they will come. We're not in a position to take that risk. So we are looking at the early part, hopefully into next year, of finding a joint venture partner potentially who would then work with us and then start building and providing those jobs. But absolutely, it's a challenging time at the moment, but obviously there's a number of years left in which to look at that. There are other opportunities. We've had some confidential discussions with some key employers who are looking at potential expansion. So again, there may be hope going forward. But again, at the moment, I'm not saying that we're not going to deliver those 1,000 jobs, but yes, it's a challenging period, but it's still quite early in terms of delivering that at the moment.
Thank you. Page 53, there's good news on young NEETs. Let's call them the young NEETs, the 16 to 17-year-olds. But I think there's a much bigger problem with 18 to 24-year-olds not in education or training. And there doesn't seem to be a measure of that in the plan. I don't know if that's deliberate. And also, I think there's a growing problem with people at the other end of their careers who are of working age, who have opted out of the job market, possibly because of pension taxes and other reasons. Just reflecting on why we're not measuring particularly 18 to 24-year-olds who are not in education or training, because I think that's a key demographic. And, you know, if those people don't get into work or training, I think behaviours get learned and it's going to become increasingly difficult to get those people into productive economic life.
So on this, the 16 to 17-year-old is around the statutory, so that's an obligation, so we have to meet that, so we do have to monitor that. I think the problem you have with 18 to 20-year-olds, it's not a statutory obligation at the moment. Now, that's not to say that the point you've made isn't important, it's not to say that there isn't a problem, but I think at the moment, in terms of the resources that we have, the moment we can just about stay on top, if you like, of the statutory, and obviously we're doing relatively well in terms of achieving that. I think obviously if ONS are saying that this is something that we need to look at and consider, I can take that back. But again, I would warn you that resources are quite difficult at the moment. So not disagreeing with you at all, but the statutory, obviously, demand is where we have to prioritise, and that's why it's in the monitoring report.
Thank you, Sonny. Maybe the committee would be minded just to at least have some stats on the situation in Medway, and the data always informs the next action, doesn't it? Thank you. Page 56, temporary accommodation. We've got a lot of families in temporary accommodation. I'm just wondering, at what point is the council going to start buying and spending the £40 million that we gave them authority to buy temporary accommodation? I'm minded to the parlous state of the council's finances and the big savings expected from purchasing temporary accommodation to offset the cost of placing those who find themselves needing temporary accommodation into the private sector.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence, for your question. So activity around growing our housing provision generally, not just the 42 million that was agreed by full council, is an ongoing thing. I mean, specifically in relation to the money that was agreed by full council, at the moment we have 9 units that are purchased and are in use, essentially. We have 32 units that we've instructed legal on to purchase, and in our pipeline, and not all of these will come to fruition because it's an open market and we may be outbid or sales will be withdrawn. We have another 145 units that we are progressing through. I mean, lots of people in this room will have bought a house. It's not quick process a lot of the time, particularly when we're buying a number of units. So we are looking at where there are opportunities for us to purchase a bulk amount of units or a turnkey scheme potentially. So we're exploring all the avenues that we can to speed up the delivery, but it is a big program and will take time just by the individual nature of some of those transactions. So that gives us about 186 that we're working on, and we've been able to do more than the 150 that was presented, or we're hoping to do more than the 150 that was asked for approval for, because we've been able to lever in some additional grant funding through the Local Authority Housing Fund, which was a pot of capital funding from the department. And we've exercised some options around purchasing back previously right-to-buy properties, which means that within a certain period of time, we're able to purchase them back and still benefit from some of the discount that we would have given to the original purchaser. So we've been able to stretch the money, or we're hoping to stretch the money a little bit further, but it is a really key programme. Purchasing of homes and managing our own homes is not a cheap thing to do. The benefit to the council is really around the way that the subsidy works from the government. So on let's say, for example, a private property costs us, for argument's sake, £18,000 a year. We may only be able to bring in, through the cap that is on the government subsidy for private sector properties, we may only be able to bring in £10,000 a year, say. So there's a gap for us. Temporary accommodation properties that are owned by the general fund, which is the part of the council that isn't a housing revenue account, we're able to achieve 100% subsidy. So the income that we can generate increases significantly. But it's also key that we maintain those properties really well and they stay in good condition and they're assets that continue to appreciate. So in some cases, before we're able to let the properties, we may purchase them, but there will be a programme of works to replace kitchens, bathrooms, boilers to make sure they meet the specification that they need to.
Thank you. That's great. Yeah, good answer, I think. Page 61, the number of homes that have been built in the authority area. Obviously, we're way under budget. Well, under target, I should say, not under budget. I'm sure Dave Harris has said that there is plenty of planning approvals out there, but builders aren't building, or there's something holding them back. I'm just wondering what officers' thoughts are on the medium term for building houses, because obviously we're going through a local plan process. I'm wondering how that might affect, in the short term, developers' thoughts about building now, or is there going to be a rush? I think the Blowers Wood site has changed hands, I hear, on the grapevine. I don't know if there's been any reason why Redrow have sold to someone else, but be interesting if you've got any intel on that.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Lawrence. So I think it's fair to say, I mean, obviously the target of 1,675 homes is the target that's assigned to us by the government. I don't think Medway has ever hit its target for the amount of homes that it needs to deliver. I think we had 3 good years where we achieved somewhere between 1,000 and 1,200 homes. It certainly feels that the market is potentially a little bit flat at the moment. So some of the engagement that we're doing with volume house builders and SME house builders and the registered providers of Medway, there is a lot of people are kind of saying that they need to just survive the market till 2025, essentially. So I think there are some challenges there. I don't know the number of consents that are given, so the amount of homes that potentially have got a consent that haven't been started yet, but there will be planning, there will be planning activity to try and improve that. I'm happy to confirm that number. I mean, in theory, I think what we would see across the country is that there would be, we would expect to see an improvement in that number after the adoption of a local plan. We'd also expect to see an improvement in sites that have been properly considered rather than kind of the planning by appeal, which I think we've suffered from in Medway over the last couple of years. Whether we will get to the target that we need to on an annual basis, I think remains to be seen. It's certainly very, very challenging, and if you look at our performance over the last decade or so, we've not managed to get there. So an improvement, but it's still a very challenging target for us, which everyone knows.
Thank you, Chair. Just one final question. been personally very interested in the Medway 2.0 project, and I notice there's no monitoring anywhere in these reports for Medway 2.0. Lots of stuff about cyberspace, and I know it falls under the digital and overview scrutiny, but I think there's a lot of parts of this directorate are dependent on some of those developments, making the council's services more efficient and also the opportunities to redeploy money saved into other services. So I suppose the question is I can also say Medway 2.0 is a big uplift in funding, which I 100% agree with, but there's a big saving in the current financial year off the back of that uplift in funding. And I think it's something that this committee might be wanting to see monitored. There is no roadmap. I've asked for a roadmap at Business ONS from Councillor Osborne, the portfolio holder. Members know exactly what's being in the development, what's the next bit, what's on time, what's to come. I'm sure officers do, but I think some monitoring on that, given it's a key programme, should be incorporated. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Lawrence is absolutely right. That is a work programme that fits in the Business Support Overview and Scrutiny Committee. I would say that the committee probably has a couple of options there. You could request an item specifically dedicated to Medway 2.0, which could Paul and his team could come to the committee and give a bit more of an overview. I would have to check the specifics around including monitoring in the future council plan, because obviously there's been a review of the council plan. We'd have to check the specifics around including additional monitoring that wasn't usually for this committee as part of that. I agree with Councillor Lawrence, it's incredibly important because it is a big programme and it is a really big saving. So we might have to take away what that looks like unless the Chair has a clear view.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, Councillor Lawrence, there will be meetings through the year of committee chairs and spokes, and I think there will be an opportunity. I think you're quite right. At the point where these things start to come online, we definitely want to have our appropriate say on them. So I think that's a discussion that, you know, I'm definitely keen to pick up at those meetings, and there'll be an appropriate point. So I think that's probably the best approach at this stage, that the next time that we have that meeting of chairs, that you will be, I hope, in attendance at, that we can have that discussion and find out what the score is.
Thank you. I don't disagree. I think all members should, at committees where Medway 2.0 really does impact the delivery of services, should be seeing those reports rather than just between chairs and shadows. But I'm very much guided by you, Councillor Patterson.
Just to be clear, Councillor Lawrence, what I'm saying is the discussion that we will have will then inform pre-agenda meetings, which will then decide at what point it's appropriate for it to come to this committee. It's not about having discussions in smoke-filled rooms. It's absolutely just about having the frank discussion with representatives of Business Support Committee to find out when the most appropriate time would be for that to happen, at which point that will be for all members to discuss. Councillor Mrs Turpin.
Thank you, Chair. I was actually going to ask a question on, I wanted an update on the purchase of a temporary accommodation, so thanks, Mark, for addressing that one. But I will just sort of go a bit further from Councillor Campbell's question about prosecutions, because I think when we've seen this sort of in the press and things, there's been lots of fines, seems to be issued at Medway service station. That seems to be like the bulk of where these fines for littering are. And I'm just sort of firstly wondering why that is. Is it because it's done via camera, or are we sending officers there because that's where it's kind of, you know, maybe easy to get targets? But I'm just thinking the focus, you know, I'd prefer to see focus in our town centres because, you know, they can often look quite bad with litter, and you know, we want to have repeat visitors and that sort of thing can put people off. So I'm just just a question really regarding how we go about issuing the fines. I noticed sort of dog fouling was very, very low, yet we see a lot of, you know, remains of dogs on our pavements. So I'm just wondering, is that just because it's so difficult to fine? You have to catch the dog in the act, so to speak. And another question is regarding quite grim, but is there any enforcement action that can be taken over spitting? Because I'm seeing that as a really major thing at the moment, like whether you're actually seeing people do it or you're just seeing it on the pavements, it's really bad. And is there any action that we can take for fines for that sort of behaviour? Thank you.
I'll try and cover those in the order. In terms of the moto services, there were a number of news stories that related to that. A conversation took place and there's much less work that takes place there. It's not to say a great deal of work did take place there, but as a gateway into Medway, it was important that it was covered off and that representation took place. If you want some opinions, and that's what it would be, why these things tend to be some of the ones that lead to prosecutions and court cases, is when this occurs to our local residents, there's a phenomenally high pay rate. When people are travelling through Medway and they just happen to have stopped off there, there's a high proportion of people who think they'll never enforce that and they won't do it, which is why they escalate to a potential court case. And both I and the officers have kind of considered and reflected on that. But notwithstanding that, I agree with you. Our priorities for these services are in the high streets, are in our town centres and areas like that. In terms of the dog fouling, yeah, there are a low number of prosecutions, and you unfortunately answered your own question. It's because it's a thing that takes place. I'm in the process of recruiting a second animal control officer. Part of their function is to do this. If people complain and they think there's a large problem, then we go with signage, information. If something's caught in action, then we'll issue a fixed penalty notice, but it is very difficult. If we were to rewind the world 15 years, this is part of the criticism of local authorities on snooping on people and deploying officers to see it. Hence, it's more problematic to enforce. It's not to say that we won't do it. We just need a large steer from people. Spitting, I'm going a bit outside my sphere of expertise. I think that might be a criminal offence. But I'll defer, and can I come back to you on that?
Yeah, I wonder whether, post-COVID, certainly there's scope for that to be discussed as a public health issue as well, and because there's no point in people wearing masks if there's all sorts on the pavement. Councillor Fern.
Yep, thank you, Chair. First question, Ian, you might have just sort of touched on it there in answer to Councillor Turpin. It's around the prosecutions and sanctions. It's obviously very disappointing to see the number decline because, as Councillor Campbell mentioned, in terms of litter in Fort Pitt, it's still an issue. We're seeing that as we're all out on the streets at the moment. There's a lot of litter. There's still fly tipping happening. But do we actually know the reason? Is it because, as you just said, it's more problematic to enforce, or is it because there's less officers? Really would be interested to see why we've got that drop off in that last couple of years.
That's okay, thank you. In terms of being problematic, that was in terms of the dog fouling, not the other issues. I think you have to look at the whole topic of enforcement holistically. Enforcement starts from education, advice and engagement. And we work using community protection warnings, community protection notices, and then that moves on to a potential fine. Lots of the work that the team do, and I'll happily provide a briefing on this last quarter, this first quarter of the year, illustrates that we issue those. Lots of people who inherently want to comply engage in that process. So in some ways, a prosecution is a failure because we fail to make people compliant. And the team do an awful lot of work that takes place in bringing these issues into compliance without the need to prosecute. That's less cost to the authority, and it means that those people are voluntarily being compliant. And it also means that my investigators can focus on those most serious cases. So it's not to say that there aren't issues and they're not challenges, and certainly, like all council services, it would benefit from more resources, but that's true across the board. But think of enforcement not necessarily as the outcome as enforcement, it's the issues that we've brought into compliance.
Okay, yeah, do, and thank you for that answer. I do accept that, but it's very difficult for us to, you know, this is a public document, this information is out there, and we're saying that, you know, that's gone down, and sort of note your comments, but the issues are still there, is my point. The issues are still there, so, you know, I think the enforcement should, you know, should go with it, and we should follow that through. A couple of other questions, just on page 21, the refuse collection target, we're above it, it's green, you know, 85%, but it's 85.6, so it's only just above the target from previous quarters. Is this because of the failed collections at the Christmas period that we saw the decline there?
It's obviously going to have an impact. It would be wrong to deny that. But generally, we have a good service. It's reached. There's occasional blips. We had the issue at Christmas, which was much more substantial than that. But what I'm hoping is that figure, as we go through the year, we'll see that normalise.
Okay, and the last one, again, it's been asked in a roundabout way, and that's in terms of like the job creation. Obviously, very poor performance on job creation, and accept the comments that have been made already. But with Medway Labour's promise for 1,000 new jobs in the local election manifesto, I mean, it's something that we need to push, and obviously something that we all want to see. But obviously, with the decision to allow Basin 3, the loss of the 144 jobs there potentially, what's the sort of outlook for the next 24 months or beyond?
Yeah, we can come back with something on that. Yeah. So you want to see how, in terms of what we're looking at, in terms of 1,000 jobs across and where potentially they can come from. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Sorry, Sonny, just and also, so when we have a situation like this, say if we do lose those jobs there at Basin 3, is that number taken into account? So is it, you know, we're looking at 1,144, or is that not part of the 1,000?
So I think the impact of the decision, which at this point in time is only a resolution from the committee to approve the application for Basin 3. It's important to point out that that application relates to the southern part of the dock site. The jobs that are referenced, they're spread all over Chatham docks, including the northern site. So I think it would be very difficult for the local authority to just assess all of that at this point in time. But as and when we think we can, we're happy to bring information to the committee.
Okay, so I've got an indication from Councillor Field, but I'm going to go back to Councillor Etheridge at this stage, if that's all right, and then I'll take any final indications before we wind up this item.
Thank you for that. And can I take members to page 61, please, where we're talking about the 950 new homes again. And I'd like to thank you for your direction that you made at the beginning of the meeting of what we're going to possibly refer to. So I'm just going to refer to some unusual events that have been taking place lately nationally, and I've had the opportunity to meet many ministers in Medway. And I've discussed with them the standard method calculation. And they have informed me, some of them with a total denial of actually receiving any information, and others that they're unable to recollect. The previous administration never, ever challenged that method of calculation. Never. And I'm just saying to you, Chairman, that as part of the new administration, and you have the opportunity now to take up that challenge, would you go back with your colleagues to your cabinet and the rest of the members to challenge that calculation to say, is it really valid?
Can you, sorry, just be clear, sorry, which calculation are we referring to here?
This is the method of calculation given as 1,658 dwellings per annum.
Sorry, I'm not catching what you're saying.
Well, the previous administration never ever challenged that calculation.
Sorry, I just want you to refer to where I'm looking at on my...
Page 61.
61, thank you. Sure, yeah.
Thank you. So I mean, I'm happy to come back with a more formal answer around where we are. The conversations that I've had with my team, specifically on those, because we do have a very challenging housing need number for Medway. Part of the process of getting to the point where we can even think about having a conversation about what that number looks like is working through the stages of our local plan. So it is, looking at what site availability looks like, going through the process of consulting, which will be taking place in July, but also working through the various sustainability appraisals and supporting evidence that goes that sits underneath the plan to look at whether Medway's growth is sustainable. So that will emerge through the local plan. I think any advice that the committee asked from officers at this point in time would be that work needs to happen, and our current timeline for completing that work will be around the probably late calendar year this year and into January for publication of Regulation 19 of the local plan. So we'll be unable to give advice to members at this point in time around whether we could challenge a number, because the work around all of the various requirements that are needed for Medway and its infrastructure and everything else that's tested through our sustainability appraisal isn't there at this particular time. That work is ongoing.
Thank you for that. Can I take members to page 63, please? Where we're talking about average journey time along 5 routes across Medway. I'd be interested to know which of the 5 key highway corridors that are measured, regardless of what's taking place on Finsbury Hill at the moment in terms of the road closure up there and the new school. The actual part of Stroud Town Centre and the surrounding roads coming off the A2 and the bypass are almost permanently blocked in the early hours of the morning and in the evening, and during from midday to at least 2 or even 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The transport coming down through Watling Street, or London Road as people may know it, coming into Stroud is absolutely horrendous. So I'm just wondering if that's one of the key highway corridors that's measured.
Thank you, Councillor. Happy to get you a briefing note on that to address those issues. And also to note that the Finsbury Hill closure, it's actually opening tonight, actually, I'm pleased to say. Yes.
Thank you for that. Perhaps we could also have some warning signs as well when the tunnel's going to be closed. Taking members to page 71, working from home guidance reissued for managers. And I'm also going to refer to something further down, because we certainly know that the predicament of Gunwharf is going to be ongoing for a couple of years yet. A number of members and members of the public have a huge issue trying to get in touch with either officers, council staff, and especially when they phone up and leave a message or send an email, it's not replied to, not to say immediately, but certainly not within 24 hours. So as we've now going to be looking at this for a potential further 2 years before this is resolved, how can we now ensure that we get a response from officers, not only for members but for the residents as well, that is viable within the 24-hour period that we should be doing so? Now, I go back a number of years of where members had a little black book that said that they had a telephone number and a contact point for different parts of the service. And then more importantly, on top of this, some of us older members here, when I say older, been around for a little while, knew certain officers that we could go to. And when we go to them now, they've left or they've moved to different departments. So we've no idea who we're contacting on a number of points. And I'm just wondering what can be done to alleviate that issue, as I say, for both members and residents.
Can I just step in on this one? Because I think you've hit on something that I think was actually quite concerning in time gone by, in the little black book that you referred to, which meant that all members were equal, but some were more equal than others. And I think that's totally unacceptable. And I don't think that it should be a case of levelling down in terms of the expectation of response, but I think it was wholly unacceptable, the sort of hectoring and, in some cases, as far as I'm aware, bullying of officers by members who had phone numbers, and I'm certainly not accusing yourself, Councillor Etheridge, but I think we probably all know some of the members that I might be some of the former members I might be referring to. But no, I think it's really important that we do have those central, you know, that there is an objective fairness in the way that all members are treated, whether they are part of the administration, the opposition, minor parties or none. I think that, you know, I would count that as an improvement in terms of fairness, but you know, I think it's absolutely reasonable to ask about the timeliness.
I think I'm quite concerned to hear that, to be honest with you, because that isn't something that's coming through to us at the Directorate, that there is a major problem either with the public getting through and getting the answers, and certainly not members. And speaking for frontline services, my own services, I'm not getting that message at all. And of course, you know, we have the frontline services inbox, and I know my colleagues who are here tonight have also got different ways to access the officers. But I think it does come down to, you know, we try and answer as quickly as we can. It's a little bit difficult because we're not at Gun Wharf, and you know, we've all got that taken away from us now. However, what I would say is to all members, if you are having particular problems, if you can let us know which areas that's falling into, where you're not getting answers, you're not getting responses, then we'd be very happy to pick that up and look into it and try and make some improvements for you.
Thank you. Can I take members to page 74, please, of where we're doing a Q3 23-24 update regarding the local plan, where it says several stages to adopting a local plan. There are a number of areas in Medway either have a published and approved neighbourhood plan or actually going through the process to have a neighbourhood plan. Currently, because we do not have an up-to-date local development plan or policy, that neighbourhood plan takes precedence over everything else, and yet that's not being done. Can I ask why?
Thank you for your question, Councillor Etheridge. I'm more than happy to discuss individual cases. If you're happy to provide me with more information, I'll have a chat with Dave, or arrange for us to have a chat with Dave and his team to discuss.
No, I'm going to leave it there. I think I've asked enough for the moment on this subject. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Etheridge. Councillor Field.
Thank you, Chair. Just one brief question. I can't actually refer to anything in the text, but it's around the strategic risks. Obviously, at the end of January, we had a special session looking at the Christmas waste services. Now, obviously, the scale of risks in the strategic risk assessment register are those of very, very significant value. However, obviously, with some of the issues that we had last Christmas, they were quite significant and quite impactful, and it was very good to have a session very quickly afterwards so that we could get information there in a time critical and salient manner. But obviously now we're a few months after that, and we're roughly halfway in the year towards Christmas. So I just wanted to check how the lessons learnt are being learnt and being applied so that we don't have the same situation this Christmas as well. Thank you.
So, okay, thank you. Last week we held a discussion with Councillor Curry, the portfolio holder, with a revised approach that will see us looking at Christmas potentially over a 3-week period instead of the 2. That was the major pressing point. That's been raised with him. I don't know whether he's going to speak to cabinet colleagues and get their view on it, but as that evolves over the next few weeks, I'm happy to provide a briefing note about what the proposed plan is.
Thanks, that would be helpful. Councillor Peake.
Thank you. I want to go back to rubbish, please. Picking up on what members said, obviously this is a bugbear of mine. I know it's not the most important thing, but litter and dog poo and all that, really annoys me. I've just come back from Spain, and in no litter, that's included in the roads where people live, and the pride that they take is a delight to see. I lived for 4 years in the Algarve, no rubbish at all at any time on the streets, so it can be done. Unfortunately, I think it's a case of parenting. My children do not drop litter, but unfortunately, that doesn't always happen. So I'm now thinking about education, and I'm also thinking about the role of this committee. I presume as a scrutiny committee that we can ask another committee or and the relevant cabinet member to bring up the idea of somewhere in the realms of education, maybe teaching or discussing with children, the younger the better, about the whole thing of being responsible. It includes overall issues of individual responsibility and self-discipline in this as well. So can you let me know how that works, please? Thank you.
So, Ian will probably have something to add to this, but you know, matters of concern to members of this committee, you can bring a member's item to this committee or indeed any other committee, and you're absolutely right and at liberty to do that. I would also, I'm guessing Ian might talk about the environmental engagement team, who I've had sort of great success with in my ward, where I've engaged them on particular problems, and they've been good at reassuring the public where they have been the victim of excessive littering, fly tipping, to put in measures to alleviate that. But you know, they have that education role, don't they?
Encompassed in the waste team is this idea of a behaviour change, and there's some synergies with our climate change team. And it's not to disagree with the councillors, but when we discuss these things and we engage with young people, they're phenomenally concerned. You know, that they're very environmentally responsible, probably more than any other generation. And when I speak to these young people and I go to these events, which admittedly isn't very often, there's a real passion for doing this. So it's not to say there aren't some members of our community that are selfish, and it's not to say that the suggestion that he's done isn't worthwhile, but our experience, especially with young people, is there's a real appetite to take responsibility for this and to improve that situation.
Just a quick response. As you're speaking, it occurred to me, I've witnessed when it's actually the parents, you know, this near to a bin, McDonald's, on the floor. You feel like screaming your head off at them. So obviously, it's not children. And I don't know what we can do about telling to, I mean, I don't want to be in an ambient state telling people how to behave, but honestly, there are limits, so I'm not sure what we can do about that.
And both through that behaviour change work and the climate change work, we'll make sure litter is figured in to all of the engagement that we do. Most young people are mortified by the concept of it.
Councillor Cook.
Thank you. Just to carry on that same bit, there were a couple of bits we hadn't picked up on yet that I just wanted to ask some specifics on. It might be, Chair, that we talk about this more under the next item, but looking still on page 42 and on 43 and those kind of enforcement issues, I wonder why we chose these particular crimes and not others, because obviously we've got a particular question in our ward around nuisance bikes, for example. Why isn't that on this list and others are? And then my second question continued from Councillor Etheridge's question about Gun Wharf, and I wanted to know a little bit more about any additional costs, because obviously we've spoken in Employment Matters, for example, about some of the things that you spoke about, Ruth, around making it so that it is a working environment for people at home. What are the other costs? For example, talking about mention of the council properties on page 70, are we losing any income from that we could be renting out space because we're having to use that for council staff? Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Cook. In terms of the nuisance bikes, historically that was addressed by Section 59 and it was entirely a Kent Police process, which is why it never appeared. As we've now got the Public Space Protection Order and those fixed penalty notices are being issued, that's an additional line that will start appearing in there.
Just on the gun wharf element, Yes, it's a bit of a pressure at the moment. We're obviously reducing. We have opened up, I think, circa 200 odd desks in Gun Wharf. We are looking at reviewing that if we need to in terms of getting more people in there, but currently that's where we are in terms of the safety and what we're allowed to do, but we're looking at over the next couple of months if we can increase the space there. There are some buildings that are being occupied, and again we're trying to look at other things like, for example, using hot desking in some of our community hubs, which obviously are community hubs. They wouldn't be used to be rented elsewhere, and obviously a lot of people are taking the strain by working from home. I think, just to reassure you, there is a wider estate rationalisation exercise happening as part of Gun Wharf, so what we're not doing is just patching it all up, getting it back together again and chucking everybody in. We are looking at where everyone is, how many desks, the maximum amount of space that we can get out of Gun Wharf. So we're not just going to put like for like, we're going to review the building and try and make it work more efficiently. We're also going to look at the way that people work, and again, we don't necessarily need like for like desks pre-rack issue. So that is part of a wider estate rationalisation, and obviously you'll know that part of our financial, some of our financial actions are looking at our estate and looking at the low-hanging fruit, looking at ways in which to sell properties. We also know in terms of the condition survey, there's some properties that would need some significant investment. Again, part of that wider estate rationalisation may be that some of those properties have our services in them. If there's space for them to work on reduced numbers in Gun Wharf, then that means we may be able to dodge the bullet on that building whilst also getting a capital receipt. So that's just giving you a flavour of the kind of things that we're looking at the moment alongside Gun Wharf. It's not sequential. We're not waiting to finish Gun Wharf and then look at trying to then rationalise the property. So it's a challenge, but that is the approach that we're taking at the moment.
Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of quick comments. Councillor Peake, I think most of the littering done in our authority is done by adults, because if you drive up Pear Tree Lane at any given point, despite the quarterly cleaning cycle that goes on along Pear Tree Lane, it is just rubbish from one end of Pear Tree Lane to the other end of Pear Tree Lane. And then we have someone who keeps dumping nappies near Hempstead Valley Shopping Centre. So I don't think we need to be educating children. I think what we need to be doing is enforcing littering provisions. And whilst I hear everything Ian's saying about education, I do think we need a stick and then we educate, because once people know that there's a stick, it will have an impact. And the other reason that places like Portugal and Spain and those countries don't have such a problem with littering is because they don't have the number of fast food outlets that we have in our area. Now, you go down Luton High Street, as I drive there, there's literally more fast food outlets than there are houses. It's becoming a real problem. And I think, especially some of these places are open long into the evening, the bins get full up. Hempstead Valley, the new McDonald's there, whilst it's 150 job opportunities, mostly for young people, you can't say no, but the bins get full up, people just dump their rubbish. And I do think enforcement is a very important part of this, and maybe that's going to be a member's item at some point, because I think, just thinking, Councillor Patterson, I think in your ward you had an issue with a illegal waste site. In my ward we had an issue with an illegal waste site, and I wonder if we'd have taken enforcement action much earlier in the process. The one in Hempstead went on for about 5 years before we finally got to public inquiry, and they'd been told to cease operation. But there's 5 years of accumulated waste there. And what damage has that done to the environment? It's a really big issue. Tree protection orders. We've not prosecuted anyone in 3 years for breach of a TPO. We've got lots of empty houses, derelict empty houses in the authority that are a blight on our landscape, but could actually be used to house people if we had a repurposing of priorities in some areas. So, I do understand and agree with your general thrust, but for me, we need to get back to enforcing. And just one more comment on the PSPO. I do really think we need to re-educate our portfolio holder about the PSPO. He seems to be making certain comments that the council have delegated new powers to the police, which he said on a number of occasions, especially with regards to the Barnfield Bikes account on Twitter, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. I do think we've missed a trick here, because a PSPO is a council-led initiative, not a police-led initiative. And I do think we need to get our act sorted out in terms of what we actually use in the PSPOs for. bit like the alcohol one. I don't think there's been many prosecutions under the alcohol, and we're just about to introduce a dog one. You know, what's the point in introducing these things if we can't enforce them? It's a bit like microchipping cats and then expecting the police to find all the unmicrochipped cats. It's just not going to happen. Thank you.
So, on that point, and you know, I think it's fair to say you're only as good as your last result, and I think we should be obviously holding portfolio holders to account, but I would also say that I can count successes in my ward already, and this is something that's really only been, you know, in force since April that we've actually been doing anything about it. Yeah, absolutely.
So when we discuss a public space protection order, it's best to perceive it as a tool. It's something that's judicially progressed by the council. The council have the mechanism to progress these notices. However, it's a tool, and then the responsible authority, whether that's the council or whether it's Kent Police, can then avail themselves of it. With moving vehicles in particular, that is very heavily focused of things in action with Kent Police. It intrinsically has to happen. There's no powers for officers to stop a bike or a car causing a nuisance. It's why we work in partnership with them. Police officers have been trained on issuing the fixed penalty notices, the process. Additionally, what we're working on as well, and we want people to come up with, is retrospective video footage. And all of those things can be enforced, but it's one of the topics that requires a partnership approach. You know, there's that duty of care that we hold these people on the bikes. I know we're focusing on bikes. It's also for the cars, the nuisance cars down the roads. And intrinsically that has to be done. You know, there's no right to stop that vehicle. That's why we have to work in partnership. Anything less than that is going to poorly serve Medway.
Yeah, and just to pick up on your other point, Councillor Lawrence, you know, I think I would absolutely not disagree that you need the carrot and the stick, and you know, we should be clear on enforcement. But what we also need to be is absolutely consistent. And I think as members, we owe it to members of the public to be consistent in the way we call for enforcement. And that means not just calling for enforcement on litter, but we've had items that have been brought to this committee where members have stood up for drivers to be able to continue to flout double yellow lines because they've suddenly been turned into red routes where the enforcement then becomes automatic through ANPR. So I think that's a great inconsistency to say we need to enforce against litterers, but you should still be cutting people a bit of slack when they park on double yellow lines. And we've had people who have actually argued blind in this committee that that's something that they don't want to happen. Well, I'm sorry, but you know, my view is if you break the rules, you should face consequences, and I wouldn't make distinctions between different offences. But no, I think we need to move to the vice chair at this stage. And just before you make your recommendation, vice chair, the point that Councillor Lawrence made around the data about NEETs. I accept that it doesn't necessarily become part of the monitoring round and it's not a statutory figure. I think it's a figure of interest. I absolutely agree. It's something that it would be, if at all possible, but I can also see that it's easier to monitor the destinations of 16 and 17-year-olds than it is to monitor what happens to them after 18 if they've left school and by definition are out of formal education. So I think we'd like to take you up on that offer in whatever shape that's able to take.
That would be really useful. As I said, I think let's start, if there is data available, let's start with the data and see where it takes us. Yeah. The only other point was on the monitoring of Medway 2.0, if there was something that we could, even if it's just noted in the minutes that we're going to think about that one.
I think if we note that we'll have further discussions between us and we'll bring that back to committee. Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chair. So recommendations, 1.1, members are asked to consider the Q4 2023-2024 performance against the measures used to monitor progress against the Council's priorities as set out in appendices 1 and 2. And secondly, members are asked to note the Q4 2023-2024 strategic risk summary as set out in appendix 3.
Is that supported?
Chair, can we just ask, there was a number of briefing notes that the officers said they were going to supply. Can we just make sure that they are all supplied?
I'll add them to the action list so that they'll be on the list to be followed up.
Thank you. Is that agreed? Thank you. Moving on to item 6 on the agenda, the Community Safety Partnership Plan 2024 to 2027. That's on pages 89 to 108 of your report pack, and Ian is going to introduce that item.
Thanks, Chair. The committee are asked to comment and note on the Community Safety Partnership Plan. The Community Safety Partnership is under a duty to produce the plan to formulate and implement a strategy to reduce crime and disorder, combat substance misuse, reduce reoffending. This report relates to the information in the proposed plan, which forms part of the Council's policy framework to cover the period 24 to 27. The Community Safety Plan discharges the Council's statutory responsibility to produce a plan on community safety. The Community Safety Partnership has a new chair, Councillor Osborne, and a new vice chair, Chief Inspector Gary Cook from Kent Police. The 5 responsible authorities are Medway Council, Kent Police, Kent Fire and Rescue Service, the Integrated Care Board and the Probation Service. Although the Police and Crime Commissioner is not a responsible authority on the CSP, Community Safety Plan, there is, however, a mutual duty to cooperate and to take account of the PCC's priorities. The Chair and Vice Chair wish to ensure there is a strategic view of community safety in Medway and to ensure that it reflects and supports the strategic ambitions of the Council and the partnership agencies in the CSP to make Medway a great place to live, work, learn and visit. Background. Each year the CSP produces a strategic assessment, which is an annual publication that assesses and prioritises crime and disorder, substance misuse and reoffending problems that the area faces. This was taken to overview scrutiny in December. Then the full draft plan and action plan has been taken to be approved by the Health and Wellbeing Board and this body. The Community Safety Plan is a policy framework document, which is why we need to give it this formality. You'll notice that there is a protocol in place between the Health and Wellbeing Board, the Adult and Children's Safeguarding Board and the Corporate Parenting Board to ensure the sharing of assessments and to plan for a better strategic alignment. There is a huge Venn diagram between those of commonality. The strategic assessment identifies 4 priorities: violence against women and girls, tackling antisocial behaviour, tackling drugs and alcohol and reducing reoffending. They were the shared areas from those 5 partners. Over the last few years, the Community Safety Strategic Assessment has highlighted these key emerging issues on a national and local level that we need to ensure the agencies continue to focus on. The new Chair and Vice Chair are keen on a more focused plan than in previous years to give partners better opportunity to hold the plan and partners to account. Consultation is noted in the report, and the CSP acknowledges that response rate is low, and partners are committed to working to increase the rate of this consultation moving forward. Lastly, it's to be aware that the CSP receives £106,460 each year from the Police and Crime Commissioner, in which 2/3 of that is allocated through a bidding process and 1/3 remains the tactical pot. If there's an interest, I can go through the areas that are bid on this year. There's the one-stop shop for Medway Domestic Abuse Forum, the Community Domestic Abuse Programme, Medway Youth Services, Medway Water Sports Trust, the Community Safety Partnership in the possession of more rapid deployment cameras, Medway Council's HRA Tenant Services and the Safer Medway Partnership. Happy to take any questions, but I'm just mindful it is a partnership document.
Any member? I think I saw Councillor Etheridge first.
Thank you, and thank you for your report, and also thank you for re-emphasising what the priorities are. Can I take you to page 97, please? And it's the second paragraph of where the statement says, we have carried out some innovative developments to the way we work together, enhancing our ability to deliver improved services to the public. And further down it says, we have developed and implemented a number of partnership initiatives using funding provided from the Kent Police Crime Commissioner, as well as achieving some excellent results in tackling crime and antisocial behaviour as detailed with the report so far to report. So I have no doubt that there are information further down detailing that. But I'd love to know exactly what those innovative developments were and those partnership initiatives were that apply to those priorities you just mentioned and how they were implemented to deliver the progress so far to report. Thank you.
Would you like me to provide a briefing note? So that'll be detailed, because remember that this is across a huge range of areas. I can talk about the public space protection orders. I can talk about the renewal of the public space protection order on alcohol. I can talk about the work that we do under Safer Streets. But I think I'd probably be talking for half hour, 40 minutes.
And especially the new initiatives. And I think not just a briefing note to me, I think every member of this committee would love to see that. Thank you.
Councillor Galvin.
Thank you, Chair. I have to be honest and say that I'm very disappointed in this document. If we look at page 102 for a start, Kent Police Crime Data Integrity Inspection, we're talking about data there going back to 2019 and 2020. I think that's just been cut and pasted from a previous report. It seems quite familiar to me. You know, I think we need to bring it up to date and see how it's affecting Medway over the last year or so, not back in ages gone. Whilst they've used the expression that this document is more focused, I think what it's done, it's dropped some very important issues out of the focus of the Community Safety Partnership. It's shrunk to 2 pages from last year's, which was at 11 pages. And there is no mention in the new document when it comes to safeguarding adults and children. There's no mention of child sexual exploitation, no mention of modern day slavery, no mention of human trafficking, no mention of cuckooing. When it comes to reducing vulnerability, there's no mention of contextual safeguarding or radicalisation. When it comes to reducing offending, restorative justice is missing, integrated offender management is missing. These are all important issues that work together to reduce crime and make Medway a better place to live. I'm all for making things focused and simpler, but this has made things just disappear. So, you know, these are key priorities that, you know, are still affecting Medway people. They should be reflected in the document. They're not reflected in the document, and I find this highly disappointing.
It's just to reassure Councillor Galvin, whilst they might not appear here, they were considered in the strategic assessment, and I can happily share that if that would offer some level of reassurance.
But this is the overarching document. This is the one that's supposed to create the framework that the partners in the partnership work to. No, the strategic assessment is a report back of how we've, successful or otherwise, we've been over a particular year. So, you know, it's not the job of the strategic assessment to set the parameters. That is the job of the action plan. And, you know, as far as I'm concerned, the action plan has been chopped down to being virtually useless.
I think, Councillor Galvin, I mean, it also talks about this being refocused following public consultation. So I think that the priorities for 2024-27 that are listed there you know, I think no one's suggesting for a moment that police will not be focusing on all of the things that you have mentioned and more. But you can, if everything's a priority, nothing's a priority. So I think, you know, there has to be some sort of focus, and the focus can't be all of the above. Councillor Lawrence.
Chair, thank you. And thank you for the report. I mean, I totally agree with Councillor Galvin. I mean, this is like reading an OK magazine. Everything's great. And, you know, Councillor Osborne's very effusive summary of, you know, what a wonderful job he's done. But I think the fact that this is a simple document, well, I'm not going to say anything more. I thought all strategic plans are built on data. What went well last year? What was the impact of what we did last year? What are we going to do this year? What are we going to do different this year? Because what we did last year didn't quite work. You know, there's always the danger in this type of thing of being on the hamster wheel of doing the same thing year in, year out, and actually it's not having any impact. So I'm really disappointed that there's no data that supports this. Councillor Patton, you talk about the public's priorities. Well, the public gave their view, but they've been ignored in the priorities that you're going to go forward with, which, you know, quite surprises me. And I think, you know, what would give me more comfort is to know that the areas that have been chosen for focus are the areas where there is the most crime and impacts the quality of life of people who live in Medway. I think a part of the discussion in the last item around enforcement is about quality of life issues. So I'm just wondering how we reconcile the survey of residents' priorities against the priorities that are being chosen. But I really would like, you know, the world is built on data. There is lots of data. And I think, you know, when we're going to write these reports, and I don't know if this is written within the council or written as a joint report with the other members, but to see some data, to understand, you know, what's going well, what's worked well, and exactly what's the impact of this going to be. No targets in this document at all. How do we judge this has been a success? If we don't know the starting points, we don't know the end points. So, you know, luckily, we're only noting this report because I don't think we have any other opportunity to do anything else. But if I'd been Councillor Osborne, I'd be sending this report back and saying, I want some data. I want to understand what's worked well. And actually, this would have been an ideal opportunity for Councillor Osborne to come and present this because
Councillor Lawrence.
It's his document. But I'm sure he's doing more important things.
Councillor Lawrence, I think that not only is Councillor Osborne not here to defend himself, and I think it's not appropriate that we make personal attacks on people who are not able to defend themselves. Councillor Lawrence came to this committee and gave a very extensive account of himself. Everyone in this committee was able to ask all the questions. So any suggestion that Councillor Osborne has not opened himself up to scrutiny, I think, is entirely unfounded. You can have your own judgment on the quality of those answers or the acceptability of those answers, but I think what we couldn't question is his commitment to answering those questions. I would also pick up on, you know, you're talking about data. Now, there's some stats that you've referred to, but just, you know, the decisions are based on everything in the round. So what respondents, for example, members of the public, felt was the biggest issue? Well, as people are often prepared to say, the feelings don't care. The facts don't care about your feelings. So you might feel the perception is one thing, but the judgment that has to be reached is based on all of that data. So you can't just pick and choose which bits. So it's not a case of the public said this, therefore. We are here not as delegates. As councillors, we are not delegates, we're representatives. So all of us will come to our own conclusions. You and I may agree or disagree on some of those 5 priorities, but what's really important, I agree, is that this is based on facts and not feelings. So let's not confuse the two. You have anything to add, Ian?
No, and Neil and I, who produced this document in association with those partners, certainly take on board the comments that you make. we'll reflect on them and we'll try and involve those comments to see if we can reflect that more. But it's to be mindful that this is this partnership document and it was written in partnership.
Just very briefly, I do think for this document to be useful, we should at least have some targets in there. We should understand what the impact of what we hope the impact is going to be. I just wondered, and I wasn't here last year, as you well know, so I've seen Councillor Osborne at other ONSs doing a job of, answering questions. I do think this is an important document. It's important for quality of life in Medway. We should know what it's going to deliver. You know, are we getting the bang for the buck that we're being given to do this? What could be better? At the moment, this is just a lot of words on a page, and I'm sure there's a whole heap of stuff in the background, but we're here doing scrutiny, but we're not giving, where's the data that we're scrutinising? Thank you.
So I think we're in violent agreement on this, Councillor Lawrence. As I say, there's extensive opportunity through the year for scrutiny of portfolio holders. The data that you talk about does come forward. We do judge on results, and we have performed pretty extensive scrutiny on this. And I'm sure that you'll have your seat booked for Councillor Osborne's next appearance before the committee. Councillor Campbell.
Hi, thank you, Chair. Let me just see where I was. Right, so in terms of the lack of targets in the action plan, when I read it, I was under the impression that there is a different schedule for the annual scrutiny of the work of the partnership, and there we would see some more measurable targets and metrics. That was my assumption. Is that not right?
Thank you. As you get that report, and I can supply you last year's report, you'll see the narrative and the information that comes and the report and the information.
Yeah.
And so you could, I know you weren't there to see it, you can see it last year. We have got these shared themes across 5 organisations. I'll certainly reflect on Councillor Lawrence's comments and trying to come up with those shared metrics is, should we say, challenging across 5 very diverse organisations. So inherently, an element of this is about narrative, is about talking about that journey for the year. Lots of the projects have inbuilt data that we can scrutinise, but all of that comes as we go through the year.
Thank you. That's what I meant. As long as we see, I'm a huge fan of brevity. 11 pages down to 3 pages is a win in my book. But as long as at some point in the year we kind of see that, I think, we'll be okay. I have a reflection. I don't know if there is an answer to this. I think there is something fundamentally wrong in the way we consult with the public, because no matter whether it's this issue, community safety, or any other frontline service, the number of people who respond to the surveys is so low, making pretty much what we have almost unrepresentative of the reality. I don't know what the answer to this is. With whatever frontline service I've looked at, this is the issue. There's only a few local politics geeks, those of us in this room, we will go and take every survey and respond to everything, So I feel like there's some work there to perhaps look at how you can reach out to more people, maybe come up with some, I don't know the answer. I'm not a communications expert, but the point is we can surely be creative and think outside the box here to be more accessible to people so that they feel they can speak to the council and the council services and the department heads to kind of, then we'll get a more realistic kind of reflection of what people genuinely feel. Because I read a lot of this and I think, I just don't believe it, like from my own experience of being a Medway resident and speaking to my constituents. That was my reflection, and yeah, that was it really, and the data for the report.
It's just to say I share your frustration when we do these communication exercises. It's across the board with me. It happens when I do the things on air quality, to a lesser degree, climate change. We engage with the comms team. we get it out there for all these routes. I wonder, not to deflect the responsibility, but maybe there's something where councillors could get it if they have mailing groups. They could encourage local residents to do it. We could maybe get that information to some of the voluntary groups that we have in the area. Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, I think that's fair, and I think those of us who do share these appeals for people to contribute to consultations will be well aware that there's always a noisy minority who never contribute but have lots to say on social media on the matter, and I think that's quite unfortunate. Councillor Gurun.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report. I think it's noteworthy that 80% respondents, and I agree with Councillor Campbell with regards to the methodology in terms of collating information, because I'm a great believer in doing it the correct way, and you can capture a snapshot of the public that we represent. But if we're not clear about the methodology, it does seem quite random. So I do hope that certain methods were put in place to capture a snapshot of the constituents that we do represent. And if it's not, then maybe there should be some reflection as to how we make sure that we are able to capture as much diverse representation, of our communities as possible. Secondly, I do feel that although it's great that we have got 5 key priority areas, on the other hand, I would have wanted to know what percentage or, what age groups in particular those, let's say, for drug dealing. Is there known statistics from the police, or the council is aware that that specific age groups are more involved or more impacted? I think that would have been helpful to know. And also, it would have been more helpful for all of us to have a sight of a clear action plan with timescales and feasibility, and whether, as you have rightly acknowledged as well, there are challenges because you have to work across 5 different organizations. But I think, being a little bit more pragmatic and with more foresight, maybe you can, as organizations, acknowledge those challenges beforehand and then find ways to work through that when you meet, because I know all of you are very, very busy people. So when you do meet, you need to use those, use that valuable time in a smart manner. But I would like to see minimum targets, at least, as in terms of and if we can have the KPIs, that would be helpful as well. So those, and the other thing that I am quite passionate about getting the police involvement in terms of doing some good work with the neighborhoods, is getting them involved with PACT. I represent Brompton and Chatham Central, and the police are regularly attending our PACT meetings. It would be very helpful for them to, the report does not mention that at all, so it would be helpful for that to be part of the report as well going forward, because when I've attended the police surgery that has been put forth by the council, the police have told me that they're very eager to come to the PACT meetings, and maybe by doing that, I would also like to encourage all councillor colleagues to maybe reach out to the police. And if you are going to PACT meetings, then do invite them, because I have found them to be quite responsive and helpful. Thank you.
Councillor Galvin.
Thank you, Chair, for allowing me to come back, because when people were talking about community engagement, it reminded me that prior to the pandemic, the Community Safety Partnership organised an evening, which the last few years we had themed things, but it gave all the people attending those things a chance to put their views across. It gave them a chance to take part in a quiz show thing, but we got those reflections back, and that was a very good way of finding out how people felt, particularly because you could make sure that you had a cross-section of Medway residents there. Obviously, with the pandemic, that stopped. So are there any plans to go back to have those? I know that Mid-Kent College were very happy to host it for us, and the students there were absolutely marvellous in doing all the checky bits for us and supporting us. And so, I think we need to go back to that, because that was a very good forum, which meant we could get a good cross-section of Medway people and discover how they felt about things. So are we going to go back to those, please?
Like you, I attended that, and maybe, we've lost some things on the way through COVID that actually wouldn't be a bad thing to reintroduce. And I'll discuss that with the officers, talk about the feasibility of doing it, whether there's something that we can do across frontline services with other functions to give it a breadth and involvement. But yeah, I think it's a good issue to raise.
Councillor Mrs Turpin.
Thank you. Yeah, just a brief comment, not actually on the plan, so slightly going, it was just on the consultation issue, and I don't know if this is relevant for now, but I was just kind of thinking about it and think that, it is difficult to get people to engage and to feedback, but often it's because when they see things, they're just not in the right place at the right time, and then they forget to do it when they are. So I'm just wondering if we could feedback to sort of IT, so I have no idea whether this is possible, but it's kind of catching people when they are engaging with the council in their own time. So for instance, like booking a tip run or something, or paying the council tax, can it then, when they've finished doing what they do, it pops up, would you like to take part in this consultation? And I don't know whether that could work.
That sounds very much like a suggestion for Medway 2.0, but yeah, I think that sounds like a very sort of sensible approach, in the same way as when you've interacted with a call centre, that you're asked to participate in a survey at that point, and if you've got a strong view, you will definitely offer it.
As I do cover waste and some of those booking systems that we've got, I think it's something that sounds a really good idea as we merge into Medway 2.0 and the systems have that resilience to have that duality. I think you're right, it might capture a whole different audience for us.
Thank you.
Councillor Peake.
Thanks. Maybe a little bit random, but I've had my hand up for a long time. When it comes to feedback, I really do support that. I mean, we all should be, and I'm sure we are, pro the idea of engaging with the public and get their feedback. Just want to put a little caveat in there. When I used to teach this, is when I used to teach business, about something that's been studied time and time again, is something like a ratio of 9 to 10. So 9 times, when people give feedback, 9 times it'll be when they've got something to moan about, when it's negative, because such is human nature. And most of us, most probably including me as well, we like something's in place and we approve it, somehow never quite get round to it. I just think that's worth bearing in mind. However, we should be getting as much feedback as possible. I originally put my hand up, going back to what Councillor Galvin said right at the beginning of this, pages 103 and 104. These are obviously just aspirations, highlighting the theme and then seeing what's to be deliverable. I will say that something like 50% of the time, I can't hear what's been said. I really strain, whether it's people, I'm doing that all the time, officers, other members, I can't hear half of it. So if you've already answered this, I apologise. What was the rationale about this part? I think it's what you referred to, Councillor Galvin, this part of the report going down from 11 to 2 pages. What is the rationale behind not having something to measure against so we can check progress, please?
That's okay. So it was a composite document produced by members, and there was an aspiration, the partners of the group, not members of the Community Safety Partnership, to come up with a more streamlined plan, something that they could then embed in their own plans about how they deliver it. I'm taking on board what you've said, and maybe, as Councillor Galvin said, that was to the point too far. On what we've lost is some of that breadth. In terms of the data, hopefully you'll see as these things are reported on, you'll see those metrics and those comparative things so you can do it. But the idea was to come up with a fairly concise document. If the thoughts are and the feedback that I take from this is that this is too short. And I know in other authorities they've reduced it to a plan on a page. So other people have gone even further. I think we're a plan on 2 and a bit pages. If the steer that I get and the thoughts are, I'll certainly feed that through to the partnership members, and we'll kind of reflect on that moving forwards.
Vice Chair. Oh, Councillor Campbell.
Don't know if I'm, yeah. I think we're just not reaching agreement as to what the purpose of this document is, you know, because I don't like the idea of 50 pages of data coming in. I kind of feel like it almost buries all the realities in that. So I don't know. We kind of need to agree. I think as a high-level vision or aspiration, as you said, this document works. But sure, we have questions about the measurability of it and how to look at these targets, whether they can be delivered and whether they have been delivered. So I'm not sure the answer is to put in all that data behind all of these lines. So there's got to be some middle ground, I think. I think plan on a page, actually, I like the sound of that. It just describes the vision, isn't it? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I definitely agree that I'm all for brevity. I really do think that we shouldn't be expecting the sort of overview document to say everything, and you know, some things have to be taken as implicit in those, and it's setting out the framework of how those organisations work together towards those broad goals. Yeah, but you want to come back on that?
Yes, certainly. You know, as involved in the creation of these documents, the feedback that you give us and the expectation of what you'd like to see, we'll take that moving forward.
Councillor Lawrence.
I was just thinking what Councillor Campbell was saying about the public engagement. I think part of the problem is no one knows what the CSP is. If you go out and stand in Rochester High Street, Chatham High Street, or the post office in Hempstead Village and said to people, what do you know about the CSP? The community said, they won't know what it is. And also, even more fundamentally, no one knows what the ICB is. And this is one of the problems with public engagement, is they lose faith because there are all of these bodies doing things, but they can't see any impact on their lives of all of these bodies doing things, because we can't you know, demonstrate that they've had an impact. So I think if we're going to get more engagement, we need to educate residents about what these bodies are, where they can find information out. And I think Councillor and Mrs Turplin's idea is an absolutely brilliant one, and I wish I'd come up with it myself, is that every time someone engages with the council's website, that they can, you know, get little flashes of, this is going on, would you like to take part? Thank you, Chair.
Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chair. 2 recommendations. The committee is asked to comment on the proposed Community Safety Plan 2024 to 2027 as set out at Appendix 1 to the report, and Draft Community Safety Action Plan 2024 to 2025 as set out in Appendix 2. Secondly, the committee is asked to note that the proposed Community Safety Plan 2024 to 2027 will be considered by Cabinet on the 9th of July 2024 and be determined by the full Council on the 18th of July 2024.
Is that supported? Agreed? Thank you. Moving on to item 7, Petitions Report, pages 109 to 112. This is a report for noting neither of these petitions have been referred to this committee, the petitioners being satisfied with the response given. Any member on this? Vice Chair.
Thank you. Just one recommendation. The committee is requested to note the petition responses and appropriate officer actions in paragraph 4.1 of the report.
Agreed? Okay. Item 8, the work programme, pages 113 to 132 in your report pack, and Nicola is going to introduce this item.
The work programme is set out at Appendix A to the report, and any changes are highlighted in sections 4.2 and 4.3 of the covering report. Members are also asked to note the action referred from Audit Committee in section 5.1 and the response that has been provided. Thank you.
Any member? Councillor Etheridge.
Thank you. In regards to the river strategy, which is right at the very end of the work programme where it says it's completed, to the best of my knowledge, none of my residents or businesses in Strood Rural or the Parish Council were actually consulted about this, but it says it's completed.
What page is that on, Councillor Etheridge?
125. I think, all right.
Oh.
I can answer that whilst you're looking for it. 125, I think it is. I think the completed is in reference to members being updated on the progress of the river strategy as opposed to saying that it has actually been completed. So a draft, if you like, scope was pulled together and there were a series of workshops in terms of some of the stakeholders and officers. There has been a lull in that since because I'm simply dying in terms of resource, so we're trying to do this across a number of resources. So there is a delay. So I guess what I'll do here is there'll be another action for us to come back with another update on when we are going to deliver the complete river strategy, but at the moment it's on pause in terms of resource.
Okay, it's just it does also state that it's been circulated to members, and I'm certainly not aware of it, so that would be appreciated to see what you've got, the status of what you've got today. Thank you.
I'll need to check. So Nicola, I can't remember if this is in your time, but I thought that there were some members that was shared with, but we can go back and check that. I don't know if you have a record of that here. Yeah, we'll go back
we'll
and
have to check that one. I think that was it was the AECOM report, yeah.
That's right. But that's fine. We'll double check and just make sure, but I had a memory of that. Yeah.
I mean, I'd just like to reassure Councillor Etheridge that as someone who has a significant chunk of the river in his ward, I'm no further involved in this than he is. So rest assured that I think there's still some significant work to be done. Councillor Lawrence? No, you're okay. Any other member? Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chair. 3 recommendations here. The committee is asked to note the report and agree the work programme as set out at Appendix A to the report. Secondly, the committee is asked to note the action log as set out as Appendix B to the report. And finally, last but not least, the committee is asked to note the action from the Audit Committee regarding 2 uninhabited flats and the explanation that has been provided.
Is that supported? Agreed? Thank you. And that concludes our business for this evening's meeting. And we're done a minute before 8:30, which I think is potentially a record. Thanks very much for your time, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.